What's up, y'all? I felt like I needed to come on here after yesterday's video about Kobe Bryant and Gayle King and that sort of thing, and talk about one of the things that I think is a bigger issue, bigger than whether or not Snoop is out here being a heinous, violent misogynist, but that's not new. Bigger than whether or not if Gayle King was being sensationalistic or just a journalist, is the bigger thing about rape culture and the ways that we collude with rape culture and the things that we do not want to face, live into, own up to about rape culture. And so I want to talk really quickly. The first thing that I want to dispel really quickly is I would like for everyone henceforth and forevermore to do away with any statement that says he was found innocent in a court of law. I would like you to stop right now telling me that people were acquitted. If you understand, and I would hope anybody in my world understands that we live in a completely inept, unjust, and violent criminal justice system that does not do anything as it relates to enacting justice, and more often than not perpetuates the pre-existing systems of oppression that already operate in the world, then you know that whether or not the legal system finds you guilty or doesn't find you guilty is about as erroneous an indicator as whether or not I fried chicken in the morning, somebody accused you of something. Saw you fried chicken this morning, can't be true. Y'all shut the fuck up with that. Stop. Just full stop. We all know that whether or not a court finds you guilty or not guilty of a crime is irrelevant, right? It is really irrelevant. The criminal justice system is racist. We know it. We also know the criminal justice system is predicated on patriarchy. We know it, which means that it's inherently sexist and misogynistic. It means that it inherently will find men in crimes against women less likely, to be, found guilty of those charges. And certainly that is the case with rape. So anytime that we're talking about rape or sexual assault, let's just not at all use that as a barometer. It's useless. The second thing that I want to talk about is consent, because I feel like we don't understand consent. And so consequently, we have these conversations about sexual assault in a context that doesn't that doesn't actually align with what is true about consent. And I'm going to say this too, that a lot of what we don't understand about consent, we don't want to understand, because then it either makes us complicit in sexual assault, or it means that we've been sexually assaulted. And those things are both really horrifyingly uncomfortable to have to come to terms with. And so consequently, a lot of us are arguing things because to acknowledge them would create some cognitive dissonance that we just can't manage. And I think we have to be honest about that. Consent is an ongoing process. It is not a thing you give and then you have it forever. It is a thing you have to keep giving, right? You have to keep receiving. And if somebody could start off saying yes and change their mind, the same way I could start off loaning you my car and then want it back. I'm not, a horrible person because I want my car back. It's my car. I'm allowed to ask for it back. And, I could have, consented to loaning you my car for an hour and then you kept the shit for 6. Not okay. Because I agreed to an hour, right? So, there are all kinds, and there's a great comic strip on everyday feminism that talks about consent and the way in which consent applies in other contexts outside of sex, so that we can, understand it a bit better without having it sort of be connected to this very charged topic of sex. And so I'm going to link to that in my bio so the folks can see that, because I think it's a really valuable tool. Here's what else it is that I want us to get uncomfortable with, as it relates to this conversation of sexual assault, is that there are so many contexts in which sexual assault can happen on so many different scales. And I'm going to trigger warning at this point because I'm going to share some personal experiences for the purpose of giving some context to this conversation. I have been groped walking in a public space. Literally had multiple men reach out and grab my breasts and my vulva while walking into a restaurant. I've had that happen. I've had a random man stick his tongue in my mouth on a street corner. I've had people in varying positions of power, either based on age or status, sort of corner me in rooms. This person was a clergy. They were a pastor. Corner me in a room and tell me that they were in love with me. I was 17 years old and like try to coerce me into kissing them. All of these things were assault. And I had a person I was being, like sexual with, making out, touching, groping, and it decided that I was as far as I wanted to be in that sexual act and had to physically fight them off of me, and but not before they had started penetrating me. And that was rape. And there's a lot of ways in which I didn't want to acknowledge that for many years. I think the person who did that to me probably is certainly not walking around like, oh yeah, I raped Sonya. No, I'm certain he's not. And in his brain, like, we were having a consensual thing, and then, he wanted some more, and I was acting like I didn't want to, but, he knew I wanted to. That's the story. That's the narrative. That is the way that consent, is framed so much in masculinity. And that framing was an incredibly commonplace experience in my growing up. And I'm certain it's not some, anomaly that I was experiencing. I know it wasn't. For most of the folks who grew up when I grew up, sex was presented to guys as a thing you figure out how to get from a girl. You take her virginity, you convince her to give you some, it was all about coercion, which is sexual assault. And, we didn't have dialogue, or nuanced language to describe these experiences when I was growing up. And we hadn't fucking done anything to unpack misogyny and the way that misogyny played out in our sexual relationships. And so a lot of us were, like I said, either complicit in sexual assault or had been sexually assaulted and didn't have language to talk about that. The other piece about that feels really important to name is that, our physical responses to these assaults are not all the same. They're not always, I fought somebody off, And even then, I've certainly had people be like, oh, she like it rough. Like, I had to fight him. And I'm sure he thought, in his brain, I just was aggressive, But people also totally freeze, terrified, and don't know what to do and lay there, right? And then someone says, oh, that was consensual. She didn't fight me. All of these things are ways in which we respond to trauma, and that our trauma responses doesn't make the assault consensual. Guess what? If someone isn't absolutely, yes, baby, let's do this, what they call an enthusiastic consenter, then like teaching people to be like, maybe I shouldn't do this at all. Maybe I should just really step back and take my time. If this person if I look uncertain, if this person looks uncertain, then I should stop, right? Like, we're not teaching men to actually be in control of their behaviors in these spaces and to think about something other than their immediate arousal and desire. Because if we were, then men would have to be responsible for saying, this looks fuzzy. I have to check in, right? I have to check in with a party beyond myself and say, the cues don't match up right now. Or this person just hasn't said a clear yes to me. I'm going to stop. And I know men who have done that, which is how I know that it's possible. But as long as we continue making the partners of people, the sexual partners, or the people, engaged with these men, culpable, the responsible party for whether or not something is clear or not, we continue to collude with patriarchy and sexism. And so, whether or not Gayle King asked the question, about this charge, what I want us to have a conversation about is consent. What I want us to have a conversation about which is why it's important to bring up Kobe's past, because there is an issue in there that is salient for today, that is salient for what it is that we need to understand today, that matters to, it absolutely is an opportunity for Kobe Bryant's legacy to be one that informs and strengthens our understanding of consent. Right? It's not about relitigating it. It's about saying, what did we learn from that? What else can we add to this positive legacy? It's like, oh, he helped us better understand consent culture. He helped us disentangle the way rape culture colludes to harm all kinds of people, to harm women, to harm Black men, right? Because it's Black men who understand consent culture are far less likely to end up in situations where they have to defend themselves. Right? So there are opportunities in this that are valuable. And I think that we're missing the opportunity to learn because we're too busy tripping about whether or not somebody brings up someone's tarnished past. How about we bring up those pasts so that we can learn from them, so that we can strengthen our understanding, so that we can be wiser, smarter, kinder, more generous human beings to each other, so that we can stop harming each other. That's really what I hope that out of Kobe and Gianna's death and all the people that had to die with them for this moment to come into being, that what comes out of this moment is an opportunity for us to listen more compassionately and generously to one another about the ways in which we have harmed and been harmed, and that we collectively move toward rectifying harm, not hiding it, not burying it, burying our heads in the sand about it, but that we collectively come together to be like, what as a public? Because this is the thing. I'm going to add this piece and then I'm going to stop, right? We're like, what about the family? Guess what? The family, prayerfully, I'm certain, have insulated themselves as best as possible from the outside world and the public's experience of this. But the public's experience is going to be public because we celebrities live public lives, right? Which means that the rest of us who are not in Kobe's immediate world have an opportunity to explore his existence and mine the lessons. There is a lesson in hard work. There is a lesson in, in committing oneself to the cultivation of one's daughters. There's a lesson in what it means to like give your entire self to a craft. And there is also a lesson in consent. And what does consent mean? And how do we better be on the same page about it so that sexual assault and rape culture die? It's an opportunity in this. And we as the public should take that opportunity to learn that lesson, to become more compassionate, generous, loving, radical humans with one another. That's my hope.